Hello, this is Keith. I'm at the Ozone Campground in the Ozark National Forest. This is the end point for Section 4 of the Ozark Highlands Trail, which we completed just this past winter. It was a little longer section of the trail, about 30 miles, so we did 2 nights on the trail, starting at Lick Branch and then ending here at the Ozone Campground. As usual, we took quite a few pictures and some video along the route to give you a feel for what it looks like on this section. And we thought we'd also tell you about something that happened one time. All right, let's go. We're going to go straight across. Hey, bud. Right here. Hey, up. All right. Power out. The upper Salmon River of Idaho has limited opportunity to explore or broaden itself. It quickly passes the few chances it has to rest and is forced back into narrow canyons of granite and volcanics, capturing the river and standing tall over it. Each bluff with a tumble of sharp, almost cutting talus at its base, creating an apron which pushes the river from one side to the other. Occasionally, older rock breaks through the blanket of lava and pyroclastic flows. Much older rock. Mesoproterozoic. The first rock to leave a record of its existence, to leave a footprint for us to view as we follow the curves of the river. Just as the salmon finds limited options, road engineers found the same. The road is often forced to travel with the river, bending with each of its curves and, like the river, yielding to the resistant. A backseat car ride on this road was enough for those so inclined to roll down a window and give notice to your fellow travelers. In the back of an ambulance, it's worse. And that's where I kept finding myself. Now, I wasn't the patient strapped into the gurney and in need of care. I was a semi-queasy volunteer EMT sitting beside one, watching numbers and counting respirations as the road pitched the ambulance back and forth. Not too often was active care needed. Instead, you monitored, chatted with the patient, and made sure they were packaged well. If they weren't, you would hear about it from the physician's assistant, who would be waiting for you at the nearest emergency room just over an hour away. It was worse in the winter, sitting there sideways with the heater blasting, keeping older patients warm, or trying to warm someone who found themselves hurt and in the cold. The ride was slow. The heavy vehicle tipped side to side on each corner, and the driver, conscious of those trapped in back, tried to go easy on them. It didn't take long for other vehicles, better suited for the geology of central Idaho, to accumulate behind the ambulance. The irony was rich, that despite our flashing lights and an occasional siren at intersections, we were often the slowest vehicle on the road. The locals knew where we were going and how long it would take to get there. They had no interest in being a part of the escort. At first opportunity, they would bolt around the ambulance and disappear around the next curve, not to be seen again. Looking through the back window, you could sometimes see an internal conversation play out on the face of a more hesitant driver. Is it okay to pass an ambulance with its lights flashing while rushing to a hospital? The landscape has applied its own definition to the phrase rushing to the hospital, and over time, the level of emergency becomes inversely proportional to the level of inconvenience. Eventually, it seemed everyone found the right place and the right time to be bold. After delivering the patient, if it was daylight, you could grab a snack and a drink at a convenience store and make your way back upriver. If it was late, you just headed back. With the exception of the ER and a couple of bars, nothing else was open. Regardless of the hour, I made my way back to the cleaned-up gurney and laid in the dark for the twisting road home. Small, isolated communities make good use of volunteers. Small, isolated communities like this one, which likes its government modest and diminishing, rely upon them, especially for emergency services. If you needed help when the fire you started to clean your irrigation ditch gets away from you, or you can't remember if it's pain in the left or the right arm which you should worry about more, it would likely be a volunteer that shows up at your door. New to town, I wanted to help, so I chose to be an EMT. I completed the training, got help from those more experienced, and put my name on the schedule, promising to show up at the ambulance shed when the radio called. It was all very prescribed, documented, and structured, as you would expect it to be. Stay over there, man. You made it. It was hard not to be a little jealous of the volunteer firemen, whose larger numbers meant no strict schedule was needed. You could always count on enough crew to show up when the bell rang. For most, it was much more appealing to picture yourself jumping onto the back of a fire truck and racing to a fire than it was stepping into the back of an ambulance with a patient. And when you returned from fighting that field fire, it was not uncommon for a rancher to deliver a bottle of whiskey, a case of beer, or lasagna as a gift from someone grateful. We couldn't have lasagna at the ambulance shed. I'm sure this perceived inequity was misplaced, but I carried it nonetheless. Oops. You can't work with emergency services and not become more aware of the hidden side of your community. The abuse of alcohol, drugs, and oneself is found in all communities, and your calls reflect that, with almost half devoted to those who fight against or succumb to these issues. That's good. Go. You're right. The others were older patients with long-standing medical issues, or patients who just wanted to talk to someone but not leave their home. And then there were the injured. What we most often see on the screen in our home, the vehicle accident or the hiker falling off a mountain, was actually the least likely to be encountered. Simply getting to the home of the caller in this remote landscape was a challenge in itself. Street signs and house numbers disappeared quickly outside of town. Many times you had to rely on the knowledge of your crewmates to get you close, and then the homeowners switching on and off the porch light to seal the deal. Information was something you always wanted more of, so you could review in your mind the steps and procedures which might be required. Stepping out of the ambulance with no idea of what you will find makes you anxious. You are left mumbling to yourself as you walk to the scene, "Please don't be a child or pregnant woman." Always your mind's worst-case scenario. No call was ever really what you expected when you left the shed, but some reached pretty far outside the norm. More bizarre than tragic. Like the early morning call for assistance from a local veteran, a longtime resident and known by most of us. By 7 a.m., we were arriving at his house. As we drew closer, we could see the gentleman standing at the end of his driveway, suitcase in hand. He was dressed quite proper, better than we were used to seeing him. He didn't seem in distress, but looked more like he was waiting for a bus. As we climbed out of the box, what we called the back of the ambulance, our patient took a step towards us and explained with sincerity and a little urgency that he had a VA appointment in Boise, and we had better get going to be there on time. While this journey to the capital city was probably the most scenic drive the state had to offer, it was 4.5 hours of winding, mountainous, scenic drive. Our time was spent explaining, as compassionately as we could, that we would not be able to get him to this appointment today and discussing other ride options for future appointments. He kind of understood, and kind of didn't. Another early call took us to a small farm. We entered the kitchen through the back door and found the homeowner, coffee in hand, standing over a stranger, who appeared to be passed out and slightly bleeding on a brown linoleum floor. The caller merely said, "Look what I found this morning," pointing at the intoxicated but breathing stranger. He was remarkably calm for someone who, while fumbling for morning coffee, found this addition to his household. By this time, the homeowner had puzzled together the string of events that led to this bizarre endpoint. Our drunken friend had found himself unable to stay on the road and instead chose a path through the farmer's field. While taking down a barbed wire fence, a fence post took exception and flew through the windshield and punched him in the head. Between the alcohol and the slap by the fence post, he was only able to stumble towards the nearest house light, stagger through an unlocked back door, and end his evening on a stranger's kitchen floor. Well, who hasn't been there? It was small-town living on a vast western landscape, a place that it wasn't uncommon for a senior to get a ride by ambulance to the clinic to be checked out, and if needed, a ride back home. To be a part of every parade and to sit on the ambulance hood at the rodeo grounds for Bullarama, waiting for a cowboy who couldn't get up on his own. A rare occurrence for these independent types. They have modeled their lives after this rugged country. Just like for the Salmon River, the geography creates tight squeezes and bumpy rides for those making their home on its slopes and in its low spots. Their link to the environment is pervasive in every aspect, and the exchange between the two is reciprocal. As the local culture adapts to the landscape also adapts to the culture. They are both changed. Each is seeking benefit, but each also feeling the vulnerability of an unwritten agreement.